All right. Good morning. Welcome back to the Coffee Squad podcast. Jake and Will here today, and we are joined with Sam Corrett from Zero Trafficking. Good morning, Sam.
Morning, guys.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me.
Oh,
Appreciate you hopping on. So today's kind of a really interesting subject that I think is a very important subject that it perhaps doesn't get as much. I don't want to say notoriety. What's the word I'm searching? Attention. There we go. I was trying to be more educated, but attention's a good word. Trying to act all smart this morning, but make up for
man. I can feel those brainwaves like bouncing over here, man. You just fried a few.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to be talking about human trafficking, and so Sam is a former Marine intelligence officer and an international real estate corporate attorney. He has an extensive experience in all source intelligence analysis, private equity compliance, and intelligence training, and he currently serves as COO of Zero Trafficking. Did I miss anything?
No, that's about right. I don't always lead with the fact that I'm an attorney. That's definitely not the thing that I'm most proud of. But they say, what's a busload of attorneys at the bottom of the ocean? Most attorneys say it's a pretty good start. It bumps up the fees for everybody else.
Yeah.
So, Sam, were you an attorney before the Marines, or was it after your active duty time or during your time?
Yeah, so I used the 9/11 GI Bill after I got off active duty. So I kind of joined on an open contract, went to OCS, and the Marine Corps does this quality spread thing where they split the officers up into thirds and then just kind of send them however it kind of falls out. So I got intel. There's the great oxymoron of military intelligence, but I served with a lot of smart people that helped me along, and really good experience.
Well, awesome. So, well, cool. I always find it interesting people's backgrounds and like how they got to where they are today, and so I think what a interesting pathway. So.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about human trafficking, and according to the Department of Homeland Security, every year millions of men, women, and children are trafficked worldwide, including right here in the U.S. It can happen in any community, and victims can be any age, race, gender, or nationality. Traffickers might use violence, manipulation, or false promises of well-paying jobs or romantic relationships to lure victims into trafficking situations. So before we get into the trafficking, let's talk about some conflict, possible beans that we're drinking this morning. So, Jake, what are you drinking? Since I know you're not going to have coffee, so.
Well, I almost made like an awful joke about that, saying, "Oh, my poor wife." But anyways, I am drinking tea and just like a vitamin water concoction that I made up. So,
okay,
yeah, nothing fancy, nothing like you and Sam over there. So, Sam, what are you drinking?
So I've got to represent some Virginia Beach coffee roasters. This is Fathom Coffee, and it's Yemen Mocha Matari. But Yemen's got the second oldest coffee culture just across the Gulf of Aden from Ethiopia, and I'd never had it before. But Jeff Werby is a Navy veteran over there. He's started Fathom Coffee, and he's got a little micro roaster behind his coffee bar, and it's pretty good, pretty tasty.
Cool.
But as you said before, not guaranteed conflict free. I don't know how much Iranian, Saudi Arabian conflict this is involved in.
You know what though? You're supporting a veteran-owned company, and so we can probably look past that. So
that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm drinking, well, I was going to have Black Rifle coffee, like darker than black or super dark. I can't remember the name of it, but I was in a hurry this morning. I forgot to put the water in my coffee pot, so I have no coffee made. So I grabbed one of my cold Black Rifle espresso mochas, cold brews, espresso shots, whatever they're called, to at least get me through the morning till I can get back down there and make my hot coffee.
Disappointing, Will.
Well,
I told Sam like you're like a coffee connoisseur. You're gonna blow his mind out with all these subtle hints and these flavors, and here you are with some like garbage in a can. Way to go. Way to go.
I mean, it's espresso with mocha and cream, so it's a little sweeter than I normally drink it, but got to do what you got to do.
Their videos though are the best, man.
Yeah.
I mean, Matt Best is a hilarious human being, and they make some delicious coffee.
Yep. Absolutely. I love that. Their marketing is kind of what drew me to them. And then I found out more about them. So
I think the marketing is their best gig. I think that's really how they got big. Just kind of throwing it in your face a little bit. So
that anti-current council culture mentality, definitely. All right, so let's get into this human trafficking. You don't want to get carried away. So that was a bad pun, right? All right, so Sam, how did you kind of become involved in this?
Yeah, so when I was going to law school, and I had a block of courses in my second semester. It was kind of family law and then a human trafficking elective. And I had a buddy who'd been in the nonprofit counter human trafficking space, kind of raising awareness and things like that. And we were going through this class, and the problems that the human trafficking movement, the counter human trafficking movement, seemed to be having is the same type of stuff we face in the military, with silos, lack of information sharing, lack of a network centric approach, kind of like early days in the counterterrorism fight, or maybe in the counter IED fight. And it seemed to me at the time, this is back in 2013, that all you really needed to do is bring over some of these lessons we had painfully learned in the war on terror, and kind of bring them over to the counter human trafficking fight. And so that's kind of how I got involved. I said, maybe the all source analysis, maybe the network way of thinking is something that can benefit this area.
Awesome. So I guess I kind of read off a little bit about what it is, but can you kind of give maybe a better explanation or definition of what is human trafficking?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, here in the U.S., the federal statute and the state statute focuses on force, fraud, or coercion used to financially and criminally exploit these human trafficking victims. So maybe that's labor trafficking, where people are brought into the country perhaps illegally, or perhaps legally on false pretenses, and they get this big debt that they have to repay. And so all of their food, all of their lodging is kind of part of that. So they never pay off that debt. So it's basically permanent indentured servitude. That would be a labor trafficking example. Probably what people are most familiar with is sex trafficking, which is definitely a huge part of human trafficking. And that's where through force, fraud, or coercion, these women and girls are exploited for the financial profit of those who control them. And I said women and girls, it is boys and men too, but predominantly because of the buying behavior is buying commercial sex with women. That's the majority of what we see.
You talk about the labor, and as you're talking, it made me think of like some of the countries I've done work in and visited. Middle East does it quite a bit. Most countries there, where whether you come from India or the Philippines or some other countries, they buy your visa. They put you up in an apartment, pay your food and everything, and it's usually 3 years. Sad, absolutely sad, and it's illegal. It's there. It seemed like it was more legal, than illegal to do.
Well, that's right. You've got, we used to call them TCNs, right? Third country nationals, and they're doing, all the cleaning, well, if you're around the Gulf, they do all the building. They bring those folks in, if the locals aren't doing that stuff, and maybe it's Filipino, maybe it's Indonesian labor.
So I guess kind of what are some of the misconceptions? Because like you said, labor, a lot of people don't think that. Most people think it's just women and sex trafficking. Is it? Can you speak of some other things that I guess or maybe expand on some of the things that else is going on out there?
Yeah, well, one thing about this is there's kind of the misconception of, is it sex work? Is it prostitution? Is it human trafficking? And there's a big debate around that. I know the Backpage case. There was a big Department of Justice seizure of that website. If you don't know about Backpage, it's basically like Craigslist, but for commercial sex. And it got seized in 2018, and the criminal case was finally moving forward, and the judge just declared a mistrial. So that's a whole big can of worms over there. But the misconception is that the women and girls either want to be involved, or if they don't want to be involved, then they're willing to necessarily be rescued. And I use air quotes rescued, because if you pull them out, then they'll cooperate with the investigation, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a misconception that the traffickers use against us, because, and I love your definition, Will. At the beginning, you said maybe they'll be recruited through, romantic manipulation.
Mhm.
And that's huge. Traffickers do that every day because it's so effective. Is they'll get these victims trauma bonded with them, and all they have to do to stay safe is prevent their cooperation with law enforcement. And so maybe that's through trauma bonding. Maybe that's through getting them addicted to narcotics. Maybe that's threatening their a change in their immigration status. Like, hey, if you try to cooperate with law enforcement, they're just going to kick you out of the country. Maybe it's getting them to commit, small theft type crimes. All these different things are mechanisms that the traffickers use to prevent the victims from cooperating with law enforcement, should law enforcement come across them. So what does that do? That makes it kind of hard to prove force, fraud, or coercion, which is what the statute says, without that victim on the witness stand.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I stopped some on the interstate when I worked on the interstate 95, and this girl and it was her boyfriend. It was her pimp. They were at Vegas. They went up to Philly, and they were on their way to Miami. And you could tell she was scared to death, trauma. I mean, you knew what was going on, but she didn't want to cooperate, and she was a consenting adult. So there wasn't a whole lot I could do except pass the information along. So that one always kind of ate at me, because I knew what was going on, but I couldn't really do anything at the moment to help out. So,
I've heard stories too, kind of along what you guys are both saying of from FBI agents. That's the hardest thing, is after they made their arrest, they have enough evidence, they have enough victims, which is sad. They have to get enough victims to actually have a trial to arrest this person. That the hardest part then is the trial and getting those victims to continue and willing to testify in the courtroom, because it can take 6-9 months, even longer, for that court case to go. They still have contact. Sometimes there's loose end contact, but there's still some kind of contact. And majority of the time is the victims end up, not wanting to testify for whatever reason. So I think it's a noble cause, what you're doing, what your company's doing. Again, like Will said in the beginning, we don't talk about it much, because I think it's just that it's like having the birds and the bees talk, right? With your kids or with anyone. It's just one of those uncomfortable conversations. But I think we need to rip that mask off, or that Band-Aid off. Let's have this conversation. Let's point it out. I travel a lot. Every time I'm in and out of Atlanta airport or some of these major airports, I think Atlanta does a really good job of, they put the signs up about human trafficking. Who the hell knows? Is that girl? Is that little boy? Is that woman? I can't tell. And I think I'm a pretty good judge of like character with a lot of the training and stuff I've had, but how are you able to tell within like 10, 15 seconds? Or is it a father just disciplining his daughter, a boyfriend and girlfriend just getting in a little argument? So there's so many, it's so hard to tell what the signs are of human trafficking.
Yeah, it really, really is. And to talk about what you said about your contacts in the FBI and friends in the FBI, where trying to maintain that victim cooperation all the way through the trial. I've heard anecdotally that from some jurisdictions in East Texas, once they get initial cooperation, the dropout rate of that cooperation stopping before they get a successful conviction is close to 70%.
Wow.
And that's not even, so that's a trafficker business model. That's a successful business model for the bad guys. But my perspective is that it's not all doom and gloom, because they have a huge vulnerability that nobody else has, kind of in the threat landscape.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as you said that, it made me think of that. There's that poem of the little boy walking, or a little girl. There's different versions of the poem. Excuse me. Walking along the beach, and thousands of starfish are washed up on the shore. And little boys in there, tossing the starfish back in the ocean. An old man comes up and is like, "Hey, what are you doing? Don't you see there's hundreds of thousands of these starfish washed up? You're not going to make a difference." And the little boy picks up the starfish and throws it back in the ocean. So say it made a difference to that one. And so to me, even if it's just one, you're making a difference.
Yeah,
Damn,
that's
look at
right.
you getting all philosophical and stuff, Jake.
Boom.
You're not just a grunt door kicker.
A lot of public speaking, Will. I use that story a lot.
So, I guess what are some things we can look for to help identify some, I guess a trafficker or some red flags that we should be aware of?
Some a huge red flag is somebody that doesn't seem to be in control of their own documents, or somebody else is speaking for them. So this is something they HSI and CBP kind of really focus on when they're looking at the ports of entry. Sometimes it's just because there's a language barrier and there's somebody assisting there. But this is where it really gets, back to Jake, your experience in reading people, because you've been in situations when, life and death depended on reading them correctly. Sensing that fear combined with that somebody else is controlling those documents is a really, really key kind of red flag. Another good one is somebody who's not appropriately dressed for the weather. I know that there's there's a lot of stuff like, what if somebody's wearing skimpy clothing or whatever? Does that mean I should report them? Well, there's in kind of the current day and environment, you can't get really good data out of that. But if somebody is out in the elements and just clearly not appropriately dressed for the weather, that can be a good clue that maybe they're working. Those are kind of the main ones off the bat, and I don't think in terms of kind of stuff you just visually come across, because a lot of this stuff is happening online.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even happening in the dark web. It's happening just through commercial sexual advertisements online. And so sellers are trying to reach buyers, and buyers are talking to other buyers about the experiences they had. And that is, number one, kind of insane. And number two, an amazing intelligence opportunity, because what, threat group, what drug cartel, what other organized threat target throws their selectors, their email addresses, all of that stuff out there for public consumption. So that, in a way, even though it's a very difficult problem, they're kind of making our job easy for us.
Well, so I have two girls, and so I'm paranoid, I guess. I'm always worried about stuff. So I think about this stuff a lot. What are some things as a parent you should maybe look out for? I mean, I know we're kind of focusing on the sex trafficking because that's mainly, I think, what the U.S. is kind of more susceptible to. But what are some things as a parent you should look out for, like on their phones, their emails, or their stuff like that?
Well, I've talked to my good friend Kevin Metcalf over at the National Child Protection Task Force. He's a prosecutor and used to be on the marshals, and involved in a lot of different stuff. But one of the things he does is he goes and helps find kids that have run off or something like that. And he said, look, there are some services out there that will allow you to kind of surveil your kids' phones. He says, but in his experience, that doesn't work. The best thing is to have the conversations with them, to have that relationship, to talk to them about life, about the threat that's out there, create the environment where they can talk with you about anything. And in that experience, he's got 3 daughters as well. And his daughters have got such a relationship with him that when they have a friend who's talking to somebody doing something sketchy, they'll say, oh, well, I'm going to bring this to my dad. We're going to dox this person and turn him over to the authorities. And so I think that relationship is probably the number one most important safety consideration. And then just educating your kids that it's a beautiful world out there, but it's a dangerous world out there. And so you've always got to, know your assets and liabilities, as a lot of folks say, and just kind of, you don't know, a person you meet online is not somebody you know. It could be anybody pretending to be anybody else.
Yep.
As you're talking, I was, when we were kids, it was like, ride your bike to a little 7-Eleven or a little, quick stop or whatever it was. And I think my parents, the biggest worry was, the ice cream van or that white creepy van that you see driving up. And now it's more sophisticated, not saying that those don't happen as much or still don't happen, but now, like you're saying, it's the online, it's the social media, it's the applications that are out there. Where I just having a talk with my buddy out in Southern California, has 2 daughters, same thing. And TikTok and also he's like, what do you think? And I was like, they're already on it, so have that conversation. So I'm really glad you brought that up, have that relationship. And then I think as a parent, be involved, it's not just a one and done conversation, but constantly be involved, be that soundboard for them. And like, hey, I try to tell my kids like, hey man, choices, we all got choices. You make good ones, you make bad ones. So I think that's a great piece of advice. As you're talking about, what are some obstacles that you face as a private firm? And then I guess kind of talk about that, and then also switch. Look, what obstacles do you also see in the law enforcement side with stopping this atrocity from happening?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think some of the biggest obstacles are if you're in law enforcement and you're on a human trafficking team, it's really hard to kind of break away from the that victim reliant, that victim cooperation driven investigation, because that's the way the statute is written. And one of the ways I think to address that is for prosecutors and law enforcement to kind of come together around this problem and say, look, this human trafficking organization is out there, and we may not be able to get them on a forced fraud or coercion charge, but we can get them on money laundering. We can get them on some kind of racketeering activity. We can get them on weapons. We can get them on the drugs that they're involved in movement. We can get them on other charges. And really, that's something that the leadership has to get behind, because a lot of times we're evaluated when we're working for the government, we're evaluated on our specific mission focus area. And so if you're on a human trafficking team and you're just doing drug and money laundering referrals, is that going to look bad on the human trafficking team because they're not throwing up human trafficking charges? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a challenge that is very, very hard for an investigator assigned to that human trafficking team to deal with that, on his own, because maybe his boss is saying, hey, if it's not human trafficking charges, it doesn't count, work harder, and that's really tough.
We've all worked for the government, right? Numbers. It's a numbers game. Yeah. How many terrorists did you kill? How many did you in a gunfight? How much this? How much that? How many did you arrest? For this crime. So that's a really, really, really good point. So I guess how does your company and how do other nonprofits? How kind of create that bridge or that lapse? How does that work?
Well, there's a lot of great nonprofits that are fighting the good fight on the awareness side and also on the rehabilitation side to kind of pick up the pieces, whether a trial is successful or not, whether the prosecution moves forward or not, to kind of help some of these women and girls get their lives back together. And they're doing really great work there. And all I can say is keep it up. That's fantastic. Where we get involved is, law enforcement has always got 10 pounds of responsibility they're trying to fit into a 2-pound sock. I think I'm kind of changing the way the expression typically goes, but I mean, that's the ask. And so where companies like mine come in is if we can discover the network for you using publicly available information, and you've got access to a data feed of that kind of stuff, just like the human and SIGINT that we used to get in the military, but unclassified because the traffickers are just putting this stuff out there. And if we can make those networks available, then if they roll up on somebody because they see him on the street, maybe he's got warrants, maybe, he's got a cell phone, and because there's probable cause or whatever other threshold is met, they have the authority to rip that cell phone. Mm-hmm. Now they can compare the networks that we found with all of his contacts, and then they can go after that criminal organization by chasing the money trail, and just doing solid network analysis. And once you take a network centric approach, then you see the network, and then you identify the weak point of it. And being military, I always kind of go back to that example. It's like, okay, well, maybe the weak point is the fact that they're using HME, homemade explosives. Well, we can take some kind of imagery in a certain way and be like, okay, well, there's all the HME drying on the rooftops. We're going to go there. We're going to take part of that part of the network. And then now there's nothing that goes, boom, as part of that. Another way to do counter network that was probably earlier in the counter IED fight was anyone on the road with a shovel in his hand is a declared hostile intent and hostile act. And so you're going to put him down. I mean, that's what we kind of had to do at that point, but probably not the best way to defeat that network, because a lot of people hold a lot of shovels for a lot of different reasons. And, now the populace is not particularly happy with us, but
the shovel companies didn't like it either. Yeah. They weren't selling a lot of shovels during that time.
That's right. But I mean, the fact is, if a criminal enterprise is making money and they have to reintegrate that money somewhere, you can follow that trail once you have their phone numbers and email addresses, because my bank has my phone numbers. They know how to get a hold of me, and I use those selectors and my identity to get after my funds. And if you can follow things that way by identifying the network, then following the money, then you can attack that network. And the evidence that's going to come out of an investigation that looks like that is not going to be putting that traumatized victim on the stand saying, this is what he did to me. It's going to be all those bank records for the millions of dollars that they're making selling these girls. And that's a totally different case.
Well, yeah, I mean, Al Capone got by the IRS for tax evasion. So follow the money is, I mean, I know working drugs, that's kind of what we did. It was a lot easier to follow the money than it is to follow the drugs.
So, Sam, you've kind of mentioned a few times, the drugs, the human trafficking, and the other illicit activities that kind of go on with this trafficking in general, whether it's drugs, humans. What kind of correlation are you seeing there with drug traffickers, human traffickers, whether it's weapons, any type of trafficking coming in and out, are you seeing a big correlation there with the groups or some type of crossover?
Yeah, so I'll give you two examples. First off, there's been a lot of academic research on this, and then a lot of news articles written about it of, drug cartels getting involved in human trafficking, human traffickers getting involved in weapons and drugs. But in some specific examples, we were looking at a network that was going up and down the East Coast for about 5 years. And we traced them back through breach data to Sinaloa, Mexico. So I would say from my side, not having access to the government information, that there's probably a narcotics nexus there. We're looking at another group in Arizona where the individual trafficker facilitator has a long list of narcotics and weapons offenses, but is also selling women for commercial sex as part of his operation. Now, the government or law enforcement didn't really have their finger on the pulse of his criminal operation outside his individual priors until we identified all of the phone numbers and all of the sex trafficking activity and phone numbers identified with it that was part of his organization. That leads us to social media, that led us to addresses, that led us to, the mobile car wash business that they do, that they use as a front, maybe a money laundering, opportunity.
I think that's criminal 101 for power washing or mobile car wash for their money laundering. So I know I watch a lot of movies. I'm a big movie buff. And you see, like Taken and stuff like that, where they grab them from one country, go to another country. How much of a problem would you say that is? I mean, it's always out there, but is it, as prevalent, or is it more prevalent?
Yeah. So my perspective on that is, I think it does happen, but a sophisticated criminal enterprise is going to avoid that because it's high risk for them. When you grab somebody violently like that, you get high priority assets going after your organization. And they may or may not always be successful in the recovery, but it's a risk. It's a risky activity for that criminal enterprise. Here in the US, it's better to take advantage of undocumented people. It's better to take advantage of immigrants coming through the legal process, but maybe fraudulently, and group foster homes. It's terribly sad, but if I'm a trafficker in the U.S., a great business model for me is to do that romantic recruitment from a group foster home, and then just put them into the business when they age out. Because if you think about that, once these girls that are part of a group foster home, maybe they've run away several times, once they're 18, they're not even necessarily on the rolls of Department of Children and Families in any state. They now become like almost like a non-person. No one is responsible for tracking them once that happens. Yep. That's my pool. That's my pool right there as a trafficker. So because no one's going to look for them.
Yeah.
So are these group homes and these foster parents are the counties and the states that are giving these children to them. And let's face it, most of these children, like, they've already had, and they've already had a shitty life. You know, that's why they're in a foster home. They're not like my kids or any of our kids who, what I say are very, very fortunate. They've already had a shitty life, or something happened extremely negative to them. Is there like background checks, and not the typical, okay, he doesn't have a felony, or it was, not your, well, I'd say your garbage background checks. Are there like deep background checks into these foster parents and these homes of workers and people that are there, where they dig in their social media, they look in their finances, they look at, not just a criminal record, but like literally what we do is the due diligence side of literally not tearing that person's life apart, but taking a microscope to their life and who they really are. Is that being done at all, or do you know?
I don't know. I think in some places it probably is. And I think a lot of these foster parents, their heart's in the right place. They're opening up their homes, and yes, they're remunerated, but they're trying to give these kids a second, third, fourth chance to give them a shot at a good life. And maybe that they're trying to bring some enhanced discipline or whatever it is to help get them right back on track, teach them responsibility for their choices. But the fact is, if these if these foster kids are running away and kind of dealing with their trauma in typical sad ways that we see and recognize, it just makes them a really, really easy target for that boyfriend who understands.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd imagine with the increased uses of social media over the last 10 years that it's probably just grown the ease of the romantic and coercion type of recruitment.
Absolutely. And it can happen so quickly over Instagram or TikTok or WhatsApp or Weibo or whatever the kids are using these days. But it's digitally, the young generation is kind of isolated from that person-to-person contact. So if digital engagement is, that's it. If digital engagement is how they meet people and forge a relationship, how do they know? How do they kind of judge the risk in that environment?
Yeah,
they may not care. They may be like, I just want to leave. I want to get out of here. I want to run away.
And now with COVID and everybody locked down and stuff, that I noticed that my daughters have expanded their digital network, where before it was mostly their closest group of friends, and now it's friends of friends of friends to talk to and play games with and stuff, because they're not having that inner human contact because everybody's locked down or 6 feet away with masks and all that stuff.
Are you guys are your kids in in-person school?
They are now.
This semester?
Yeah, they are now this semester. So
I
My
think
kids
that's
have
a really
been
good thing.
Yeah, for the last 2 years. So,
but last year
I've been lucky.
Yeah.
So
what are some things? Yeah, it depends on where you're at. But I know there's like California stuff like that. I think they're still locked down pretty hard. So,
I was out there last week, and at least in Sacramento County, where my nieces and nephews go. They're back in school. I went to my nephew's high school football game. Yeah. So I got a few questions, and you may not know the answer to this, but as we're talking, I remember, I don't know, was it 10 years ago, like the John Stossel To Catch a Predator that used to air on Friday nights, kind of almost like a primetime thing, and that's kind of slowly gone away. But legislatively, what is there anything that can really be done? Can we petition our legislative branch, locally and federally, to help change some of these laws that would actually make it easier to prosecute? And again, the burden, and what I love about the U.S. is it's on the burden of law enforcement, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the state to prove guilt, but sometimes we write laws that literally handcuff our law enforcement agencies as well. Is there anything that you see that could, that we could help petition?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, a lot of states have racketeering, or RICO add-ons to their human trafficking statute, and this is fantastic because it gives you the mechanism right into the statute to go after these other kinds of evidence that are not going to focus so much on making that victim carry the burden with their story and their willingness to tell it. So I think that's really huge. Another thing we can do, through our local organizations or through, petitioning the legislature, is to encourage adding financial investigators to the human trafficking task forces. Some are starting to do this, and it makes a huge, huge impact because, like you said, that's how we got Al Capone. I mean, you can't. The tax code is complicated. They might not even be, trying to do tax evasion on purpose. It might just be through a screw up, and then that's how we can get them. I think so. Those are two things: using the RICO statutes that are on the books, encouraging our human trafficking task forces to include financial investigators, and the third thing I'd say is just encouraging people to be aware, spreading the story that human trafficking networks are growing now because they feel safe, because we've made victims carry this burden. And that getting that message out there is going to get leadership saying, all right, I have tools, I have statutes on the books. I am going to encourage collaboration across the interdisciplinary areas of my team. I'm going to make sure the finance guys are working with the human trafficking guys. I'm going to make sure the narcotics guys are saying, hey, where's my human trafficking network report?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to always be spending, tons of money out of the evidence locker or whatever it is, out of the seized assets for my confidential informants, because it's dangerous and slow, and then they might lack credibility. The fact is that human trafficking networks are vulnerable. They're vulnerable because they have to be loud to reach customers, and we can go after them once we take that focus. The day when ATF agents and gang units are saying, where's my human trafficking networks that are operating in my area, so that they can go up on phones or whatever else, I think is going to be a very bad day for the criminals and a very good day for us.
Yeah. I know working on the interstate, a lot of times, well, most of the time, we tried to find some sort of federal connections for a RICO, so we can get the federal agencies involved, because obviously we don't have the time or resources to do as much as they can. So that's a good point. And another thing, a lot of times it's organized. These networks are very organized. So you have organized crime going up against disorganized law enforcement. When you talk about communicating with each other, that's why these task forces are really good a lot of times, where you like Blue Lightning and stuff like that, where you have all these groups of law enforcement agencies working together and talking together. I think the more that we do that, the more likely we are to combat these groups.
That's exactly it, Will. And we could even see a day when, the FBI's white collar task forces, they're the pros at following the money and dismantling these sophisticated crime syndicates. They can be working the case from the direction of, okay, what are the real estate assets that these criminal enterprises are putting their money into? Because real estate's a black hole, guys.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make a ton of money in your criminal enterprise and then slip it into real estate through a web of companies, and it's not even going to be subject to the Bank Secrecy Act or a suspicious activity report or any of that. So I just want to put a big blinking red target on the back of these guys. I see a target-rich environment, and I mean that's kind of what we like.
Yeah, I'm too bad we couldn't just terminate them.
Yeah.
Kind of do the same thing. Hey, you're carrying a shovel after dark, but
That's
again, that'd lead to chaos. And good thing I'm not in government making laws anymore. And as we're talking about this, I just pulling up one website. And it's just talking about 10 examples of federal human trafficking cases. So the guy in Wisconsin gets 21 years for human sex trafficking. Again, he used heroin, made him a promise of a better life. 21 years seems kind of light to me for something like this. To me, it should be a life without the possibility of parole. Another guy, 2 men trafficking 3 underage girls, multiple cities across the East Coast. Massachusetts man, 2 counts of sex trafficking by coercion. Similar. And then Oregon man pleads guilty to human trafficking by forced labor. That's where he is using Thai women, kids from Guatemala, and pushing them out. A Texas couple indicted on charges of forced labor. 10-year-old girl from Africa. 2 men in Maine face life sentences for human trafficking. Well, that's a good one. Or they actually get life. But Chinese women, like you kept bringing up foreigners, being a majority of that you're seeing. Ohio man pleads guilty to human trafficking involving minors. So force them to work on farms. Guatemalan little boys and girls in Ohio. You got only 10,
the at-risk groups that are mostly targeted. Yeah.
Up to 10 years. I had to pay $6 million back in 10 years, and that to me seems like a slap in the wrist to me. So it just seems, with social media too. I've seen it where if social media companies can make algorithms picking up hate speech and stuff like that, you would think they'd be able to write algorithms for some of the sex trafficking stuff. And maybe they do. We just don't know about it. But I would hope the social media companies, to me, they have a moral obligation to help stop this if they can.
Well, I mean, I should have said this before when you're talking legislative focus, but the Earn It Act is the Earn It Act, and I'll send the information over. I don't have the actual legislative code, but it's focused on requiring social media companies to do more or lose their CDA 230 immunity about some of these topics. Of, I think the argument is they say, oh, we're just a platform, we're not responsible for the content, and the Earn It Act is about changing that. So we're a big proponent of that here at Zero Trafficking. Also, in Arizona, they passed this last legislative session to make it a mandatory life sentence for child sexual abuse. Which I think is absolutely fantastic. Absolutely the right answer.
Well, didn't Apple come out recently talking, and one of their updates are going to start, I don't know how they're scanning phones or whatever for certain words and photos and stuff like that for child pornography. Is that right?
Yeah, they came out with something and then they backpedaled it and said that that they were maybe not going to do it. So I'm not sure exactly what the current answer is right now. But
I think that's a slippery slope once you start. I mean, like, I agree, sex trafficking and all that stuff needs to be taken care of, and the Earn It Act is great. You got to be careful because you know how the government is. I mean, you know, you got to be careful. It's a slippery slope. You know, so
you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, I think is what you're saying. Well,
yeah. So, Sam, talk to us about Zero Trafficking, what you guys do, and let's kind of have that discussion so our viewers and listeners can understand kind of your guys' method.
Yeah, absolutely. So Zero Trafficking, we're a small intelligence startup company. There's a lot of great work happening on the awareness side and the rehabilitation side. Our slice of the pie is we discover human trafficking networks so that stakeholders can disrupt them. Maybe that's government, maybe that's private industry that's got their own human trafficking problem they're trying to get a handle on. And so we teach people how to find these networks efficiently and find out a lot of information about them. We do that network discovery on behalf. That's kind of our consulting services side, where you come in, we come into your area of operations or whatever your jurisdiction is, and we will find the networks that are in your jurisdiction and hand them over to you in the form of an intelligence briefing and package and data. And then finally, we catalog every network we find and put it in our database. And so people that are fully bought into this network-centric approach, they can purchase access to that database, and it gets updated all the time.
That's all. So, you know, as you're talking about kind of what you do in the training side, especially, you know, kind of piqued my interest at, you know, airlines, you know, some of the major airlines, the Americans, the Deltas, the Uniteds out there. Have they reached out? Are they being trained? You know, not just the airlines, but the cruise ships as well. You know, those private type companies, are they being trained? Are they receiving any types of training, or I guess like more in-depth type training?
I think they're getting awareness training now, and folks have done a really good job about that. What they need to get is they need to get the data, the selector list, if you will, so that if somebody's registering for a plane ticket and this number is on a blacklist, then they know that they need to either notify the authorities or they need to dig a little deeper and make sure they've got ironclad attribution on who this person is. Maybe it's a mistake, maybe they borrowed somebody else's phone, but you need to look a little bit deeper. If the person who's, you know, just bought 10 plane tickets to fly into or across the country or from LA to New York is using phone numbers that's showing up in commercial sexual advertisements.
Wow. So can you tell us a success story? I don't know. I don't want to put anything in the air that's going to help anyone of how you guys have successfully helped.
Yeah. So there's one example where two law enforcement jurisdictions in the Southwest we're separately looking into some massage parlors that, and in their communities, they've got some big massage parlor problems over there. And so when a nonprofit hired us to come and find networks in that area, we found that those two businesses were linked to each other, and that they were sending girls back and forth between those two massage parlors. And then they were also linked to other massage parlors in California and Florida. And they were moving the girls around. And we were able to do some good work assisting with that, passing that information off to the Attorney General's office, and hopefully take them down. That hasn't happened yet. So that's why I'm being a little bit vague. But there are some places that are integrating their financial investigative component, and we're really excited about that, because the money trail it doesn't break down because of its trauma when it's on the stand.
That's awesome. I know it always amazed me how one cell phone number could link so much together. Like you could link 2 or 3 different organizations together just by one cell phone. I always thought that was kind of cool. So, well, I appreciate you coming on today. I think it was a really good conversation. I'll put out some links on our YouTube channel and stuff like that for online site like Department of Homeland Security and child exploitation stuff, so they can go look at the resources there. So I really appreciate you coming on. It was a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Really appreciate
Sam,
it.
awesome work. Honestly, thank you and your company and all the volunteers and law enforcement who's out there battling this disgusting crime day in and day out. So thanks for what you do.
All right, guys, everybody, we'll catch you next week. Have a good one.
Take care.